Hello everybody, we're going to move on now to Chapter 3 to finish out Unit 1, where we're going to talk more about the cells of your body and a little bit about how they function and a little bit about their diversity. And I am recording at home today, and I've got two dachshunds here, and I just thought I would go ahead and introduce them to you guys. This is Bert over here on my left and Ernie over here on my right. The reason I'm introducing them to you, they're getting squiggly there. They're not too happy about being up here on my lap. The reason I'm introducing them to you is because whenever I record videos at home, they like to bark, just like that. So when you hear barking, that's what's happening. Okay. I'm sure there will be zombies or something outside while I'm recording this video that they'll need to bark at. Okay, so Chapter 3. So in Chapter 2, you learned about the chemical building blocks of our cells, the inorganic and organic compounds that your cells and therefore your tissues and your whole body are composed of. And so in this chapter, we're going to go over some background information about cells that you need to know to move forward in the course. Now, this chapter is very extensive. There's a whole lot more background information in Chapter 3 than we're going to go over. We could probably spend an entire course covering the information in Chapters 2 and 3 pretty easily. So, just keep in mind Chapters 2 and 3 are there for you as a reference as you move through your anatomy and physiology courses and, even from there into the future. If you're reading about things in the book or hearing about things in class and you're missing some background there, or it's referring to something you're not too familiar with, pretty good chance that information might be back here in Chapters 2 and 3 for you if it's related to something about chemistry or some sort of detail about how cells operate. All right, this little cartoon I've got here on the opening slide for Chapter 3 refers to two stem cells talking to each other. We hear about stem cells in the news all the time. And the cells of your body are very diverse. There are many different kinds, at least 200 different types of cells in the human body that we know about. And now if you think about it, though, you started off as one cell, right? Sperm met egg, formed the first cell that was the new you, and that cell had to divide over and over and over again to eventually create trillions of cells that make up the entire human body. And many of those, obviously many of those cells, or all of those cells, take on some sort of specialty depending on where they're located in your body. And so what this means is, originally you consisted of early cells that had to retain the potential. They had the potential to develop into all of the different cells in your body. So those kinds of cells that aren't really specialized, but yet they have the potential to change and become other cell types in the body that are more specialized, those are called stem cells. And we hear about those in the news quite a bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about stem cells when we get to Unit 2. Okay, cells are the smallest living unit. So if you remember in smallest living unit, so if you guys remember back in Chapter 1, we talked about the special requirements of living things, what makes something living versus not living. What do living things have to do in order to stay alive? So an individual cell is itself a living thing, so it meets those individual requirements that living things have. Now, if you go smaller than that, when we were talking about the different types of molecules and ions and things like that, protein, DNA, those are not living things. Those are molecules. They cannot operate by themselves as a living unit and meet all those requirements of life. But when you put all of those chemical building blocks together and form a cell, now you do have a living unit. Even individual cells have to maintain their homeostasis in order to survive. And as I just mentioned, the human body, an adult human body, is composed of many trillions of cells. We don't know the exact number. It's going to vary from person to person. Now, those cells are divided up into at least 200 different types that we know about. New types are discovered from time to time. We certainly don't know everything yet about the human body. And many of those cells are specialized, and then others are stem cells that retain the potential to convert into various types of cells on the in the human body when they need to. The cell types in the body, they do have differences associated with them, as you might imagine. Here's a diagram from your textbook, which is illustrating for you some different cell types in the body, such as erythrocytes. Those are your red blood cells. Here are a couple of different types of muscle cells in the body. You know, here's a sperm cell. Most people are familiar with what that looks like. Here's a fat cell, really essentially is like a big glob full of fats that are being stored. Nerve cells, also known as neurons, you'll learn about those at the end of this course. You know, have a lot of branches associated with them. So, you know, all of these cells are very diverse. If you look inside, they are going to have a lot of common structures. They have a lot of things in common that they do and how they perform their basic operations. But then they're each going to have unique differences, unique structures to give them their special shapes and functions that they do have. So we'll hear a lot about cells as we move throughout the semester, because as I mentioned, when you're studying the physiology of a particular body system, you know, it really comes down to what are the cells in that body system doing. The cells are the actual locations of metabolism where things get made and broken down and used and so forth. So we'll hear a lot about cells. All right, so as I mentioned, yes, the 200 different types of cells in your body all have unique features and unique appearances and sizes and shapes and structures, but they all do have some common structures and functions. The three basic parts of a human cell, if I can kind of just draw a really basic level cell there, they have a covering around them, and that's called the plasma membrane, or sometimes called the cytoplasmic membrane, also sometimes called the cell membrane. See, there they go. I told you they were going to start barking. But that is a covering around the outside of the cell that is built from lipids and proteins, and creates a nice barrier at the surface of the cell, is absolutely critical for that cell to be able to maintain its stable internal environment. And we'll actually in this chapter spend quite a bit of time talking about the plasma membrane, because many physiological processes occur or are controlled by what happens at that surface. All right, and then inside the cell, you have a structure which, if you're looking at cells under the microscope, has a darker appearance, and that is the nucleus. The nucleus is where the DNA molecules are located. The chromosomes of human cells are inside there, and the nucleus has it itself has a membrane covering around it. The nucleus is sometimes called the control center of a cell. All right, so now everything in between, everything in here between the plasma membrane and the nucleus, that is considered to be the cytoplasm, and that consists of intracellular fluid, so that means fluid inside a cell. You have that in there, and then there also are a lot of, remember in chapter 1 we talked about organelles? Those are almost like little miniature organs. They're not really organs, they're structures inside a cell that have specialized functions. So in a sense they are kind of like organs down at the microscopic level for cells, so they're called organelles. Just don't confuse that term organelle with organs. All right, so those are the three basic parts of a cell. Now here's the diagram from your textbook, which is showing you a generic human cell and all of the various parts that you would find on the inside of a typical human cell. The cell's been cut open for us so we can see the inside. So this big purple structure here is the nucleus. A chromatin, that is another term for the DNA that's located inside the nucleus. And all of these structures you see in here, this blue one, the endoplasmic reticulum, the lysosome over here, mitochondrion. This green structure you see here is called the Golgi apparatus. Then you've got these little fibers, these little tube-like structures that are extending throughout the cell. Those are parts of the cytoskeleton. All of those things are considered to be organelles inside the cell. So a typical cell will have many of these different things, and again, they all have specialized jobs, and you'll hear about those off and on throughout your courses. And we'll have a later video clip toward the end of Chapter 3 where we'll talk a little bit about the basic functions of all of those different structures. All right, so that's our introduction to cells. Next lecture, we're going to move on to the plasma membrane, and as I mentioned, we'll actually spend the majority of our time here in Chapter 3 talking about the plasma membrane, because that's actually the part of our cells that comes up the most during the remainder of this particular course. So I will see you on the next video lecture.